But there are other ways, I think, also that a test can be an inaccurate reflection of a student's knowledge. As we're going to discuss, the way I phrase the questions, the things that I ask for in response, right, all of that can trigger more success for some students than in others, especially when you consider the fact that from a learning perspective and a modalities perspective, a test is really not consistent with the way most of you teach. I just want you to think about that for a moment. Whatever you choose to use, even if it's straight lecture, right, it's all auditory. And now you're asking them to retrieve it from a piece of paper. And if you think that that doesn't make a difference, I'm pretty certain that it does. I remember once when I was living in Chicago, so in February we had one of these, let's call it, across the spectrum of schools, we had a PD day. And we had a woman who came from Peoria, Illinois, which is about a 4-hour drive from Chicago. And she was an expert on memory. And she talked about episodic memory and various things that we can do to deepen the learning for our students. And one of the things that she talked about when it comes to testing is that we have to find ways to create effective retrieval cues. What are the things that we can do to bring the information that's in their minds, but we don't necessarily bring it out properly from our students, which is why Madeline Hunter says that you should wait 7 seconds, ideally, anytime you ask a question before you field a response. Because the wait time associated, that's what it's called, wait time, about 7 seconds. It sounds like an eternity in a classroom. It really does. And you have to kind of get used to that, because many of us feel like we're not teaching if there isn't a constant exchange of information. If there's silence in the room, it's like, hard to deal with, especially in today's day and age. A little digression for a moment, if I may. In our society with social media, for our kids in particular, if they eat breakfast and they don't post a selfie of it and put it online, did it happen? I often ask that question, right? If I went to the store and didn't post it on Twitter, did it exist? So nowadays, I'm not quite sure. But this is the type of generation that we're living in, where everything is about sharing, 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 even if it's mindless. And so it is important to be able to have them think about things, to bring it in. It's actually one of the 8 intelligences known as interpersonal learning. And I don't think, frankly, we do enough of that. So if you're teaching, to use a Judaic studies example for a moment, the Akedah, the experience of Abraham and Isaac at the altar when he's thinking that he's going to sacrifice the son he's been waiting for. Well, what did it feel like? And I want you to take a few minutes to try to imagine the emotional feelings for father and for son as you're having that experience. Or what it would be like if you were George Washington and you're dealing with the following battle. Or you're Abraham Lincoln and you're seeing your generals battle after battle failing and the war not going your way. And bringing that inside of you and thinking about it and all of these kinds of things. So coming back to the testing experience. So this woman said that oftentimes we need to do different things to bring out those retrieval cues. Did you ever have the following experience? You're sitting there at your desk. You just gave out the test. Everybody's quietly at their desk taking your test. All of a sudden, that student over there starts to look at you. And it's as if she's looking right through you. And then she puts her head down and she continues writing. Please just put a thumb up if you've ever had that experience, something like that. Okay, if you've had that, it's probably because she's using you as a retrieval cue. Believe it or not. You, the very you, will remind her sometimes of an experience. It's called episodic memory. I'm using the episode, I'm using the context in which the information was originally shared as a way of bringing it back, which is why, and everybody please forgive me, the ladies in particular, she said that she would keep the same outfit for an entire unit. She wouldn't change her clothes for the entire unit, because that would help her students remember. And so she was extremely focused on, how can I do everything possible? Okay, I know that was going to elicit some comments, I'm sorry. But but something to think about, okay? But it is important that we, and I often make this point, as we are talking about our school year, as we talk about our lesson planning, and all these kinds of things, to me there's one major deficit of every lesson plan that I've encountered, and it could be there's one out there that I haven't seen that does this. But I really believe that every lesson plan should have a space for retention. How am I going to have my students remember this? beyond the next 2-3 days or 2 weeks. Maybe you've had this experience that I'm about to describe. You've given a test, the students knew it before, the review was excellent, the test scores were great. The following Wednesday, you ask them a question related to the previous test, and it's as if you've never taught that material before. Have you ever had that experience? I've had that experience. I see some hands pop up, some heads moving. Now, why does that happen? It happens because we don't get it far enough into their brain. Imagine, it's not really the way a brain works, that you sort of cram it in. But metaphorically, we can visualize it in that way. The deeper I get it into the brain, the deeper you hold on to it. So that's why, for example, I still remember a word in 7th grade that I've never used since, with the exception of professional development workshops. And the word is tawdry. Would anyone like to translate or define tawdry? Is there a vocabulary teacher in the house? Yes? Unkempt. Anyone else? Thank you for that.
Is it Hebrew or English?
Tawdry, good one. It's actually Indonesian. Anyone else? Yes? Is your hand up?
Yeah, I would say inappropriate or
Uh-huh.
vulgar.
Okay. So I'll tell you the definition in my vocabulary book when I was in 7th grade, which was a couple of years ago. The definition in my 7th grade vocabulary book was showy and flashy and lacking in good taste, which is pretty much a reflection of my wardrobe. And so, how was I, the 7th grader, going to remember a word that I don't think I would ever use again? So I just took the word tawdry and I divided it into 2 parts, T-A-W in the beginning, D-R-Y in the end. And I visualized W-A-T, flipping the first 3 letters, turning into water. The last 3 letters were dry, which sort of reminded me of the dry cleaners. And so I visualized clothing that was going to the dry cleaners that was showy and flashy but lacking in good taste. And so I've remembered it ever since. That's about building the retention into our lessons, so that when we do give a test, it's not simply because we want the satisfaction of saying that at the end of this 2-week unit that we just taught, that they can, for the moment, indicate success, but then a week from now they can no longer do that. We want it to live beyond the test, I would hope. And if that's the case, then we do need to be thinking about how are they going to hold on to it. But in fairness to our students, and really in fairness to ourselves for now, minimally you should teach them a very simple technique. Again, please forgive the language. It's called a brain dump. And a brain dump is where you take the information at the beginning of a test and you pour it all onto the margin of the test, anything that's in your short-term memory that you think you might forget. And you teach this to your students before they look at any questions and get confused. The purpose of it is very simple. We have a very funny rule in testing. The rule is, I'll use the Jewish vernacular for the moment, if I bring the information into a test in here, it's kosher. If I bring it in here, on a piece of paper somewhere, it's treif, which means it's either acceptable or not permissible. But now if I bring it in here, but can't hold it here, and I quickly put it here after the test has begun, it remains kosher. So therefore, what you're telling your students minimally is, if there is information that you're not sure you're going to hold on to, write it down right away. Take a minute or 2 to do that. Right? Sometimes they want to get so busy with the test that they don't necessarily fully prepare themselves. There is a lot we can do to help them be better test takers.